The land stretched quiet under a pale amber sky, the kind of morning light that clung to old fence posts and lit the dust like a prayer. Somewhere out there, beyond the edge of what men called Sable Ridge, the world yawned and turned, but here it held its breath. The only sound was the creaking of wood as Elijah Crow swung open the gate to his barn. He moved slow, not from weakness, but from the rhythm of someone who'd survived too much to ever be in a hurry again. His boots whispered over straw as he stepped inside, the air cool and musty with the scent of horses long gone. He didn't keep livestock anymore. Hadn't for years. Just a few chickens, a mule too old for work, and the silence. Elijah was a man carved from solitude. Mid-50s, tall but weathered, like a tree that had grown sideways to escape the wind. His hands were rough, his beard salted with gray, and his eyes, those were the only part of him still young. Sharp, watchful, like he expected something to come for him. Maybe it already had years ago, in the fire that took everything he had loved. Since then, he spoke little, trusted less, and loved no one. The barn was supposed to be empty. That's what made him stop mid-step. A sound, so soft it could have been a dream, curled out from a haystack near the back wall. Not a rustle, not a breath. More like the hush of someone too afraid to make one. He moved without a word, slow as shadow, hand resting on the handle of his old hunting knife. And there, half buried beneath old feed sacks and brittle straw, lay a shape. No more than one. Children, 6 of them, by the count of heads and shoulders, huddled close like pups in a storm. Their faces were streaked with dirt, lips chapped, eyes wide even in sleep. A girl no older than 7 clutched a baby, her fingers white from holding on. A boy lay curled at her feet, body trembling beneath his thin shirt despite the heat. And at the center, a woman. Her dress was torn, dried blood crusted along the side of her leg. One arm wrapped around the smallest child, like armor. Her eyes fluttered open at the creak of the floorboard under his step, and Elijah saw what lived behind them. Fear, pure and clean as snow. She tried to rise, bracing herself on an elbow, but her body gave out, and she collapsed into the straw with a sharp, muffled cry. "Easy," Elijah said, his voice more gravel than air. "Ain't no one gonna harm you here." The woman didn't answer, just stared, chest heaving, jaw clenched against pain, or panic, or both. Her face was sunburned, her lips cracked. But there was something in her stillness, not surrender, but strength held back like floodwater behind stone. He knelt down, not too close, arms hanging loose at his sides. "You got a name?" he asked softly. She didn't move. He sighed, stood, walked back out the barn door without a word. 15 minutes later, he returned with a basin of water, a pot of warm beans, and a wool blanket. He set them down near the woman and her brood. Still didn't ask anything. Still didn't press. She watched him as if waiting for a trick, a cruel turn, some condition of kindness that would bare its teeth. But none came. Elijah walked back to his house, the screen door, slamming, shut behind him. By the time the sun climbed above the ridge, the children were eating like ghosts reborn, their silence broken only by the sounds of spoons scraping tin. The woman had not touched a bite, but she drank the water with shaking hands, never taking her eyes off the farmhouse window. Later that afternoon, Elijah returned. He had made space in the cellar, swept it clean, laid out bedrolls and lanterns. He helped carry the children, one by one, without question. The baby cried in his arms. He didn't hush it, just held on tighter. He didn't ask who she was. Didn't ask where she came from. Maybe because he already knew. Maybe because something in her silence was too sacred to disturb. When he tried to help her walk, she recoiled, pain blooming across her face. So he wrapped his arms beneath her knees and back, lifting her like you'd lift a broken wing from the dirt. She tensed at first, then let go. Her head fell against his chest. And Elijah, for the first time in over a decade, felt the weight of another soul against his own. Inside the cellar, she lay down without speaking. The children curled beside her, used to the dark, used to the cold, used to hiding. Elijah pulled the cellar door shut behind him and stood in the twilight for a long while, watching as the wind tugged at the grass. The sun dipped low, painting everything in bronze. That night, he lit 2 lanterns instead of one. And when he sat on the porch, staring at the horizon like it might stare back, he whispered a name he hadn't said in years. Sarah. The prairie didn't answer. But somewhere in the barn, 6 children slept safe for the first time in days. and a woman with eyes like thunder and hands like prayer breathed easier beneath a stranger's roof. As the stars blinked awake above Sable Ridge, the town remained unaware. But change had already crept in, barefoot, bruised, and hungry, into a barn that was never supposed to hold anything but dust. And Elijah Crow, man of no miracles, had just offered shelter to a storm. Tomorrow, someone might come asking. But tonight, the land exhaled. And for the first time in a long time, so did he. The days that followed unfolded like pages from forgotten book, each line written in glances and gestures rather than words. Elijah said little. The woman said even less. Yet something wordless passed between them, something stitched from shared silence, like two weathered maps finally discovering the same destination. She remained nameless, though he was certain she had one. A name full of dust and fire, no doubt, a name that had likely been used against her once. Still, she kept it locked away, like a secret buried beneath too many goodbyes. He didn't press. He never did. Instead, he mended the split in her boot while she slept, left a jar of preserved peaches by the cellar door each morning, and taught the youngest boy, the one with eyes like wet stone, how to crack corn for the hens. She watched all this from the shadows of the porch, the hem of her borrowed dress brushing her bare ankles as she leaned on a cane Elijah had carved from applewood. Her injury was healing slowly, torn muscle, maybe a fracture, but her movements carried a grit that didn't match her frame. There was fight in her bones, but not the kind that throws punches. The kind that keeps breathing even when no one's watching. The children, too, began to soften. The oldest girl, no more than 12, kept to herself at first, always standing a little apart, always shielding the others. But when Elijah showed her how to collect eggs without spooking the hens, she smiled. Just once, quick and quiet, like her face wasn't used to the shape. The middle boy, Elijah, never got his name, tried to fix the gate latch using a rusted spoon. Elijah found him at it, sat beside him, and handed over a proper screwdriver. No words passed, but the boy stayed beside him the rest of the afternoon. These small things, they added up, like drops of rain soaking into long dry soil. Still, the town noticed. Sable Ridge wasn't big, nor forgiving, and though Elijah rarely visited, his sudden purchases from the general store didn't go unnoticed. Dottie Whitlow, sharp-eyed widow and keeper of gossip, raised a brow when he bought extra flour, powdered milk, soap. "Expecting company, Elijah?" she asked, her voice sugared with suspicion. "Just making room," he replied. "Winter's early this year." She narrowed her eyes, said nothing more. But later, she spoke to Sheriff Roth, who once played poker with Elijah before things between them had gone stiff and sour. The sheriff came knocking 3 days later. Elijah met him on the porch, hat low, rifle leaning casually against the doorframe. "Just checking in," Roth said. "Some folks think you've taken in guests." Elijah didn't blink. "Folks think all kinds of things." Roth smirked, but there was something behind it, the old rivalry, the tension still unsaid. "You always did like your privacy," Roth said. "And you always did like your questions," Elijah answered. The sheriff tipped his hat and left, but he looked back twice. Inside, the woman had stayed silent, crouched low behind the kitchen wall, her breath held tight, like it might shatter. When Elijah returned, she was already packing what little they had, half loaves of bread, a tin of salve, the blanket from the porch chair. "You expecting me to let you go?" Elijah asked gently. She looked at him then, truly looked, for the first time. Her eyes weren't just fearful. They were full of grief, and pride, and something deeper. "I can't bring danger to your door," she whispered. "You already have," he replied. She flinched, but he wasn't finished. "And I'd do it again." The words hung there, heavier than the sky. She didn't speak again that night. But she didn't leave either. The next morning, she stood beside him as he split wood. She couldn't swing the axe, but she stacked the logs. Her limp was worse in the cold. He noticed. Wrapped her knee tight in cloth, soaked with peppermint oil. That evening, she left a single silver ring on the kitchen table, tiny, delicate, etched with flowers. "For your help," she said, her voice quiet. "I'm not trading kindness," Elijah replied. "You want to thank me, stay." And she did. The children, too, began to settle. Laughter came in sudden bursts, like thunder from clear skies. One evening, they turned the old wheelbarrow into a race cart. Elijah watched from the porch, a rare smile tugging at his face. When the youngest boy tumbled out, crying, it was the woman who kissed his scraped chin. But it was Elijah who lifted him into his arms. That night, they sat beside each other by the fire, neither speaking, both watching the flames as if the answers lived in them. Finally, she spoke. Only 4 words. "My name is Amara." He didn't look at her. "Beautiful name," he said. Another silence stretched between them, not empty this time, but full of something unspoken, warm as wool. Then she added, barely audible, "He's looking for me." Elijah's jaw tightened. "Who?" Amara shook her head. "Someone powerful. Someone who thinks I belong to him." She didn't say more. She didn't need to. The bruises on her arm told part of the story. The fear in her voice told the rest. Elijah nodded once. "He won't find you here," he said. She looked down. "You can't promise that." "No," he admitted, "but I can promise what I'll do if he does." The next day, Elijah rode into town, first time in months, and bought more supplies. Extra ammunition, rope, a new shovel. He didn't try to explain. On the way out, he saw a stranger at the saloon. Tall man, clean boots, watching everyone a little too closely. That night, Elijah dug a second cellar entrance behind the house, just in case. When he returned inside, Amara was waiting at the window. "Someone's coming," she said. He looked at her, the firelight dancing in her eyes. "Yes," he answered, "but so are we." Outside, the wind had shifted. The smell of storm was on it. Not rain, no, something older. Something coming fast. But inside that small, worn house, with its patched roof and flickering lamps, was a woman who had nothing left to give, and a man who had given up everything. And now, together, they were building something neither of them had dared to hope for. The threat still lingered. The shadows hadn't lifted. But something else had begun to grow in their place. Not safety. Not yet. But something like it. And it was enough. For now. The first frost came quiet, like a thief with soft hands. It laced the window panes in delicate veins and kissed the grass silver before dawn. Elijah stood on his porch, mug in hand, watching his breath curl up into the cold morning like smoke from an old fire. Inside, Amara was wrapping the youngest child in a blanket too thin for the season, her fingers chapped, her motions careful. The boy clung to her shoulder like ivy. She hummed something under her breath, not a tune Elijah recognized, but it rooted in the air, soothing. The house had taken on a new rhythm. The creak of floorboards meant more now than just his own weight. The kettle always seemed to be boiling, and the scent of bread hung like a memory in every room. Still, beneath it all, the shadow lingered. A question without shape or answer. Who was coming? And when? Elijah didn't ask Amara for details. He never had. But that didn't mean he hadn't guessed. Late one evening, as the children slept in a circle near the fire, she finally offered a piece of truth. Not as confession, more like a fragment caught on the wind. "He owns land," she said, "and people. The kind of man who makes the law sit down and hush." Elijah didn't turn from the fire. Just sipped his coffee, eyes fixed on the flames. "I was the housemaid," Amara continued, her voice low, unraveling. "Then the governess. Then something else entirely. He took what he wanted. When I tried to leave, he took my name." A pause. "The children?" Elijah asked. "Belonged to no one. Not really. Some from the orphan trains. Some left on steps. I taught them. Fed them. Loved them." He turned now, his eyes soft, sorrowful. "And saved them." Her silence was answer enough. Elijah nodded once. No pity in his gaze. Just a quiet, thunderous respect. That night, he oiled the hinges on the barn door, reinforced the locks. Buried 2 rifles in the woodshed. Left the lantern on. 3 days later, the man arrived. Not at the house. Not yet, but close enough to rattle the stillness. Elijah saw him in town. Rode in like he owned the road. Polished boots. Coal-black coat. He didn't dismount at the hitching post, just waited while 2 riders, hired guns likely, spread out and asked questions in low tones that soured the air. His name was Silas Grange. Elijah heard it from Dottie's husband, who poured drinks at the saloon, and heard too much. Said Silas claimed to be a benefactor of the church. Claimed he was reclaiming stolen property. When Elijah rode back home that evening, the sky was a sheet of steel, and the wind had picked up like it meant to say something it couldn't quite form. Amara was already on the porch. She knew. "Elijah," she said. He stopped his horse. Waited. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "Letting us stay?" He dismounted slowly, his boots crunching frost-bitten grass. "I regret not having more room." She looked down at her hands. "I don't want you to get hurt for this." I already was, he said softly. Long before you showed up. The children knew something was wrong. They moved quieter now, clung closer. The older ones slept with makeshift weapons beneath their blankets. Elijah hated that. Hated that they had learned the language of fear before they ever knew real safety. That night, he called a meeting in the kitchen. Lanterns burned low. The kettle whistled in the background. They'll come soon, he said. Might have paperwork. Might have guns. Amara stood behind him, her hand resting lightly on the back of a chair. I don't want any blood on this floor, she said. Not yours. Not theirs. I'll handle it, Elijah replied. But if they take you, there'll be more blood than names to count. A heavy silence followed. The oldest girl reached for Amara's hand. One of the boys clutched Elijah's sleeve like an anchor. When the children had gone to sleep, Elijah poured 2 cups of rye whiskey and sat across from her at the table. You know, he said, before the fire, before I lost Sarah, I used to be a preacher. Amara blinked, surprised. Didn't wear the collar long. Got disillusioned. But I used to tell folks something I still believe. She leaned forward slightly, waiting. He tapped his chest. That the truest kind of salvation don't come from pulpits or prayers. It comes from what we choose to stand for. Even when it's dangerous. Even when it costs everything. She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I believe that too. The next morning, he found a hand-drawn picture on the kitchen table. The youngest girl had left it. A sketch of the house, surrounded by stick-figure children, and 2 tall figures standing guard with halos drawn over their heads. Elijah stared at it for longer than he meant to, folded it carefully, and tucked it in his shirt pocket. 2 nights later, just after sunset, hoofbeats thundered up the hill. They didn't come quietly. 4 riders. Silas at the front, face sharp as a cleaver, flanked by hired men. One held a leather satchel. One kept his hand on his holster. Elijah met them at the gate. Rifle slung over his shoulder, coat unbuttoned. Silas smiled. The kind of smile men wear when they think they've already won. You've got something of mine, he said. Elijah said nothing. Silas stepped closer, unhurried. A woman. 6 children. My ward, she was. Run off with my property. Elijah's jaw tensed. She ain't your anything. Silas raised an eyebrow. You forget how the law works out here. I remember how right and wrong work. The law, well, she's blind. And tired. The man with the satchel handed over papers. A warrant. Likely forged, but good enough to fool the weak-hearted. Elijah didn't look at it. You bring your law. I'll bring mine. Silas narrowed his eyes. You won't shoot me, Crow. Not with children watching. Elijah's voice was low, steady. Then don't give me reason. Behind him, Amara stood in the doorway, her shawl wrapped tight, face calm. The children stayed inside, hidden, watching through the cracks in the shutters. The standoff stretched thin. Then, from the trees, movement. Dottie Whitlow, Sheriff Roth, and half a dozen townsfolk stepping out of the woods, silent but present. No weapons drawn. Just watching. The hired guns hesitated. Roth cleared his throat. Heard you were causing trouble, Grange. Silas turned, fuming. This is a legal reclamation. The sheriff shook his head slowly. You might own land, might own men, but you don't own people. Not here. Silas looked at the others, then at Elijah, then back to Amara. I'll be back, he hissed, with more than words. Elijah took 1 step forward. You come back. I'll have more than words waiting. And with that, Silas turned, spurred his horse, galloped off into the night, his men following like smoke in wind. The others faded too, one by one. Sheriff tipped his hat. Dottie gave Amara a soft nod. The woods swallowed them again. Elijah turned to Amara. You all right? He asked. She stepped down the porch stairs, took his hand in hers. For now, she said. He squeezed it gently. For now's enough. The wind had changed. No longer just a warning. It carried the promise of something more. Not safety. Not peace. Not yet. The stand had been made. And in the heart of a worn-down farmhouse, guarded by love and something fiercer, a new chapter waited to be written. The sky broke open 2 nights later. Not with lightning, not with rain, but with hooves. With noise. With firelight flickering on the horizon, like the edge of a bad dream coming closer than it ought to. It was past midnight when Elijah rose from his cot, the hairs on his arms standing like soldiers. The air felt wrong. Thick. Tense. The way it used to feel before a firefight, back when men still called him Reverend, and he still believed in mercy. He moved through the house without a sound, boots unlaced, rifle in hand. Through the back window, he saw them, 5 riders now. Grange had brought more men, more muscle. No law this time. Just fire and threat and the heart, echoing certainty that this time he wasn't leaving without blood. Amara was already awake, standing in the kitchen, her hands trembling, but steady enough to load bullets into the revolver Elijah had left on the counter days before. He looked at her. Just looked. She nodded. Nothing else needed saying. He moved to the cellar door and opened it slowly. The children, already gathered with blankets and nervous eyes, looked up at him. No screams. No panic. They had learned how to be quiet in danger. That more than anything made Elijah ache inside. "You stay down," he said gently. "And no matter what you hear, you don't come out till I do." The oldest girl nodded, her face drawn like she'd aged 10 years in 10 days. Amara touched each child's head before stepping away. "They won't take them," she whispered. Elijah met her eyes. "They won't take you either." Outside, the night shivered. The riders split apart, circling the house like wolves. Grange stayed at the front, dismounted now, his boots crunching on frostbitten soil. He carried no gun, not in his hands at least, just a length of paper and a sneer that could cut glass. Elijah stepped out onto the porch. The lantern hanging beside the door swayed in the wind, casting long shadows across the yard. "You brought more trouble," Elijah called out. Grange stepped forward, his breath clouding in the cold. "I brought truth. That woman belongs to me. Those children too, by proxy. There's laws. There's papers." Elijah's rifle didn't move from his shoulder. "You think a signature means ownership? You think a woman's skin is land you can stake?" "She was under my care," Grange said, voice sharp now. "She ran. She stole. She defied me. And you sheltered her." "I've protected her," Elijah said. "There's a difference. One you wouldn't understand." Grange's voice turned oily. "You don't know what she is." "I know what you are." That silenced the air like a bell toll. The riders behind Grange shifted uneasily. One stepped forward, uncertain. But Grange raised a hand. "This doesn't need to end in violence." Elijah's voice dropped low, steady as a storm rolling in. "No, but it will, if you take another step." And then it happened. Grange reached, fast, but not for the paper. For the pistol at his side. Elijah didn't wait. One shot rang out, cracking through the stillness like thunder through glass. Grange's hand flew back, blood blooming across his coat. He collapsed to his knees, choking on shock, reaching for nothing. Everything stopped. The riders looked to each other, to him. Their leader bleeding out on frozen dirt. Their plan undone. But Elijah didn't raise the rifle again. Just stood there, tall and unmoved, a man who had finally come home to his own spine. "If you ride now," he said, voice low but booming in the still air, "you leave alive. You stay, and you'll meet the part of me that survived a war and buried a family." The men didn't answer. They turned, one by one, horses kicking up frost, riders disappearing into the black trees like ghosts who never wanted to be seen again. Grange groaned, tried to stand. Elijah walked to him, slowly, the way you walk to a dying fire. He knelt. "You never saw her," Elijah said, quiet enough that the cold could keep the words. Grange spat blood. "You think she'll stay with you?" "She already has." And with that, he stood, turned, left the man to the night. Inside, Amara hadn't moved. She stood at the door like she was carved from cedar. He stepped in, closed the door. "It's over," he said. She crossed the room in 3 steps and wrapped her arms around him like they were a life raft and the sea had finally calmed. Elijah held her there, not tightly, not possessively, just enough to remind her she wasn't alone anymore. The children came up later, one by one, blinking at the lanterns. The oldest girl cried for the first time. One of the boys clung to Elijah's leg and wouldn't let go. They buried Grange before dawn. No ceremony, no markers. Just a man returned to the dust he treated others like. By the next morning, news had spread through Sable Ridge like wildfire. But instead of outrage, there was quiet respect. Dottie brought bread. Sheriff Roth stopped by, hat in hand, saying nothing but leaving behind a bottle of whiskey and a nod. And so life began again. Slowly, not with fanfare, but with breakfasts shared around a table, and a fire that didn't need watching, and a woman named Amara who smiled more days than she didn't. Elijah built a second room onto the house. taught the children how to tend the mule, planted spring onions beneath the kitchen window. One day Amara joined him at the edge of the pasture, watching the sun slide down the ridge like a tired prayer. "I still hear him sometimes," she whispered. "In dreams." "So do I," Elijah said, "but his voice doesn't reach this far anymore." She reached for his hand. "Neither does mine," she added, a tear slipping free. Elijah turned to her, thumb brushing it away. "I hear you just fine," he said, clearer every day. The wind lifted around them, warm this time, carrying no threat, only promise. And somewhere far off, not just in miles, but in a life once lost, the sound of a town remembering how to be better than it was. A man found a family not by blood, but by bravery. A woman reclaimed her name not by force, but by being seen. And 6 children, once left to the mercy of strangers, now ran barefoot in the yard, laughing. The world would keep turning. Storms would come again. But here, on this small patch of earth, this stubborn house, this mended heart, there was peace. Not perfection, but peace. And that, after everything, was more than enough. If this story whispered to something inside you, if it made you believe, even just for a moment, in kindness over cruelty, then like, comment, and subscribe for more stories like this. True or almost true, but always human. And let us know, where are you watching from tonight? Because wherever you are, even in the loneliest places, there's still light in the barn. You just have to look for it.